In September of 2016, when a violent storm hit the Roosevelt National Forest and old pine trees were falling under the weight of the wind, one of the volunteers of Trail Care Colorado noticed something in a cracked stump that at first glance looked like a dark lump of resin. As he got closer, it became clear. In a deep hollow lay a smooth, palm-sized rock wrapped in discolored strips of duct tape. Underneath, there was paper with coordinates clearly visible, embossed as evenly as if someone had spent hours on it. The volunteer did not know that these coordinates would lead investigators to one of Colorado's most notorious cold cases, the story of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman, who disappeared 6 years ago during a routine weekend hike to Lost Lake and never returned. On May 23, 2010, the weather in the Roosevelt National Forest was calm and clear as spring. That morning, according to the Idaho Springs weather station, the sky was cloudless and the wind barely moved the tops of the pines. On that particular day, 24-year-old Roman Lindsay and his 22-year-old girlfriend, Liana Kaufman, left their silver Dodge in a small parking lot off the Eagle View Trail. A visitor log on a nearby information stand recorded 2 handwritings and the time as approximately 9 in the morning. According to hiker Michael Reeves, who was about to embark on a short-day hike at the time, the pair talked to him for several minutes about the weather forecast and the condition of the trail. He recalled that Roman jokingly said that, "If it doesn't rain by the evening, it's a victory." Reeves later noted that the two looked confident, had quality backpacks, and wore clothes that you wear when you know where you're going. The route to Lost Lake was not considered dangerous, but it required endurance. The Eagle View Trail had several steep climbs, and after the 2-mile mark, it turned into a less visible dirt path that meandered between dense spruce forests. According to Ranger John Perry, who was on duty that day, it usually took hikers about 3 hours to reach the lake area, unless they made long stops. Roman and Liana planned to spend 3 days in the forest and return at the end of Monday, according to their work schedules and messages to colleagues. The first alarming calls came on the morning of May 26th. At Colorado Springs Tech Solutions, Roman didn't show up for his shift at 8, even though he always came in early. At the Vermont Avenue Creative Studio, Liana could not be reached by phone or email. Relatives initially assumed that the couple had been delayed in the mountains due to bad weather, but according to the National Weather Service, no heavy precipitation or storms were reported in the forest area that Monday. Later that afternoon, Lindsay and the Kaufmans filed missing persons reports. Forest Service rangers arrived at the parking lot near the Eagle View trailhead that evening, a little after 7 o'clock. The Dodge was in the same spot where it had been left. The car was locked, and inside were some of the things you don't usually take on a mountain hike: a change of clothes, extra water bottles, and a pack of travel wipes. According to Senior Ranger Todd Harrison, the door showed no signs of being broken into. There was nothing inside to indicate a rush or conflict. The first search party was formed before dark. The dogs headed down the trail in the direction of Lost Lake. According to a report by the National Sentinel Record, the dogs picked up a faint trail, but after half a mile, it disappeared among the compacted hiking footprints. The search continued at night, using flashlights and thermal cameras, but to no avail. The next day, the operation was launched on a full scale. Volunteers, experienced hikers, local residents, and a helicopter crew joined the search, flying around the lake throughout the day. The helicopter pilot, Kevin Lowry, noted in his report that there were no signs of human activity near Lost Lake from the air. No tents, no signs of fires, no movement. On the ground, the situation was the same. Search teams combed the forest square by square. Rangers checked all the side trails, inspected streams and narrow gullies where tourists could have fallen off or strayed from the route. In an area of increased difficulty, where the trail narrowed between stone outcroppings, they found several broken branches, but Forest Service experts officially noted that these traces could have been left by anyone in recent weeks. What was most surprising was something else. According to Alan Duran, the head of the volunteer group, the missing tourists were supposed to have a bright green tent and 2 large backpacks, all equipment that is difficult to lose unnoticed in a pine forest. However, not a single item belonging to Roman or Liana was found. On the 4th day of the search, the first possible witness came forward. A hiker, Martha Gray, reported that on May 24, around noon, she saw a couple on the Eagle View Trail who matched the description. However, as she clarified during a second interview, she was unsure of the details. They were passing quickly, and she was unable to see their faces. This testimony did not provide anything concrete and did not change the course of the investigation. The search lasted more than 2 weeks. During this time, they checked almost 30 miles of trails, used 7 search dogs, and interviewed all the tourists who were in the forest from May 23rd to May 26th. No new traces appeared. The couple disappeared as if they had dissolved into the depths of the forest, where even in clear weather there is semi-darkness between the old fir trees. At the end of June, when all available areas had been combed, the operational headquarters officially stopped active search. The case of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman was reclassified as a cold case. The families received copies of all protocols and reports. There was not a single statement in the documents that could even begin to explain the disappearance of 2 people at the same time, without traces of a struggle, without things left behind, without any hints of direction. The forest was silent. And then no one knew that 6 years later he would return the first piece of evidence. September of 2016 in the Roosevelt National Forest is remembered as a time when nature seemed to decide to remind us of its own power. According to the Idaho Springs Weather Station, a storm hit the area for 3 days in a row, bringing strong winds, heavy rains, and sudden pressure drops. Rangers reported dozens of downed trees along remote routes. That's why Trail Care Colorado announced an unscheduled trail clearing campaign near the headwaters of Stone Creek, a place that is rarely accessed by regular hikers. The area was mountainous with rugged terrain, and the distance to the Eagle View Trail was about 10 miles in a straight line. Getting there in the fall meant spending hours trudging through wet branches and deep potholes where water flows after storms. According to volunteer Adam Sloan, a group of 6 people set out before dawn to assess the extent of the damage by lunchtime. According to preliminary estimates, several hundred yards of the trail could be blocked. Around 11 in the morning, the volunteers came upon a large pine tree that they said had fallen like a match. The tree had been uprooted. A huge lump of earth was hanging in the air, holding on to only part of the rhizome. The trunk was lying across the path, blocking the way. The photos taken by one of the volunteers for the report show a split stump and a cavity where the hollow used to be. It was there, in the dark recess, that volunteer Travis Miller saw something that didn't look like forest debris. At first he thought it was a piece of charred rock, but when the light of the flashlight fell on the object, he could see the smooth surface of the stone, dark, smooth, rounded, as if it had been worked by hand. According to Miller, the stone was the size of an adult's palm. It was tightly covered with duct tape, under which was a crumpled but not damaged piece of paper. The volunteers carefully pulled the find out of the hollow and, not realizing what they were dealing with, unfolded the paper. The coordinates are a string of evenly embossed characters. No marks, no explanations, no names. Just a set of numbers, so clearly marked that Miller had the impression that they were not written, but minted. According to another member of the group, Lee Johnson, none of those present could recall a single instance of someone leaving such marks in wood, and wrapped so carefully. The stone was no accident. It was put there on purpose. According to the regulations of the Colorado Trail Care, any finds of unexplained origin must be documented and handed over to the authorities. Miller contacted the Gilpin County Sheriff's Office via satellite phone. The The recording of his message, which is preserved in the department's archive, contains a short phrase: "We found something that definitely doesn't belong in the woods." The officer on duty dispatched 2 sheriff's deputies to the scene, and the volunteers were told to stay in position and not move the stone any further. While the group waited for law enforcement to arrive, they continued to inspect the site. According to volunteer Melissa Rowell, there were no other objects or signs of anyone's presence in the vicinity. They found no footprints, no ropes, no pieces of cloth, nothing that would explain how the stone ended up inside the old hollow. They were particularly surprised that the hollow looked like the stone had been there for a long time. But the insulation tape was almost completely intact, which meant that the object could not have been in the tree for years. At about 13 o'clock, Sheriff's deputies Mark Doyle and Brianna Haig arrived at the scene. According to the protocol, they took pictures of the find, made a description, and removed the stone in a special bag. Against the backdrop of the autumn forest, which had not yet dried up after the rain, this event looked unnaturally gloomy. Doyle wrote in his report that the situation looked inexplicable, but too organized to be a simple tourist prank. Before leaving the site, the deputies conducted a brief inspection of the fallen tree. According to them, the roots looked completely naturally destroyed by the storm. The hollow was dry inside, although the trunk was soaked in the rain. This fact was later recorded by one of the forensic scientists, who concluded that the stone had most likely been placed in the hollow much earlier than the tree split. This meant one thing: someone had been here before the storm. Someone had left the coordinates there on purpose, expecting to find them only when the tree fell. The stone was delivered to the Gilpin Sheriff's Department that evening. It was handed over to the unit that deals with objects of unknown origin. Experts noted that the piece of paper was protected so tightly that moisture did not penetrate even during the storm. There were no fingerprints on the paper, at least not that could be identified. This meant that it had been held with gloves or handled with extreme care. And then, for the first time, they remembered an old disappearance case that had shaken the neighborhood 6 years ago, the case of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman. The coordinates embossed on the paper, according to the analyst's preliminary assessment, were located near the border of the territory that was considered a potential area of their route, although search teams had not previously entered it. However, at this stage, the sheriff had no reason to make official statements or link the discovery to the missing couple. All the documents contained only dry, factual wording. A stone was found, coordinates were found, unknown origin, and the location to which they pointed needed to be checked. The forest was calming down after the storm, but the feeling that someone had deliberately hidden the message there remained. Volunteers who participated in the cleanup later recalled that they left Stone Creek with a strange feeling, as if the storm had revealed not just the roots of an old pine tree, but something much darker that had been hidden in the forest for years. Coordinates scrawled on paper from the hollow of a fallen pine tree led investigators to an inconspicuous site a few miles northeast of Idaho Springs. The terrain here was remote. Dry hills, rocky outcroppings, thickets of stunted pine, and old maintenance roads that had long since lost their shape. According to Gilpin County records, the area was listed as the private property of the Granite Vista Construction Company. The company stopped working at this quarry back in 2008, and no one has officially visited the site since then. According to Deputy Sheriff Mark Doyle, when they first arrived at the site, the landscape looked as if nature had simply swallowed it up. Dried concrete blocks were overgrown with moss, metal beams had rolled down the slope, and the entrance to one of the maintenance tunnels was half filled in. The coordinates pointed to the edge of the oldest section of the quarry, behind an abandoned loading platform that had once been used to transport crushed stone. Investigators examined the area and noted that the ground seemed unnaturally leveled, as if someone had rolled equipment into the area many years ago. It was this point that led to the involvement of specialists with ground-penetrating radar. The report of the forensic unit stated that on the first day of operation, the equipment produced unusual reflections at a depth of more than 1 yard. These were fuzzy but characteristic signals that could indicate the presence of foreign objects under a layer of clay and gravel. The next day, equipment was brought in: a small excavator, a mobile laboratory, and a team of archaeologists from the University of Denver with experience in dealing with historic burials and landslides. Dr. Gail Merton, who led the archaeological team, emphasized in her official commentary that the first excavations were conducted with the utmost care. Layers of soil were removed with narrow buckets, and then they worked manually with spatulas, brushes, and sieves. Everything was recorded on camera. On the third day, at about 16 o'clock, one of the archaeologists raised his hand to signal a find. The first to appear was a fragment of fabric, a crumpled piece of bright orange color that had been in the ground for at least 6 years, according to a preliminary examination of the fabric. Shortly afterward, the shovel hit something hard. The archaeologists immediately switched to hand tools. In a few minutes, the top of a human skull appeared from the ground. The work was completely stopped, the site was fenced off, and forensic experts took center stage. According to the procedure, every centimeter of soil was sifted separately, and all the found items were packed in separate sterile containers. The protocol states that at a depth of about 2 meters, they found 2 skeletons located close to each other. They were lying in a chaotic position, as if they had been thrown down in a hurry. Next to the skeletons, they found the remains of a torn nylon backpack. Its fabric was severely damaged, but some elements, zippers, fittings, internal seams, were identified as products of the early 2000 years. In the same layer, there were fragments of a flashlight, which, according to experts, was broken by a strong impact, and part of a plastic handle with a half-abraded texture. The skeletons were taken to a forensic laboratory in Golden. Experts worked for several days cleaning the bone material and taking measurements. The first results indicated that the remains belonged to young people. Next, they needed dental records. According to information from the archives of dentists in Colorado Springs and Denver, the implants, fillings, and the shape of the dental arches matched the medical records of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman. Particular attention was drawn to the conditions in which the bodies were found. The archaeologists noted that the layer of clay and small stones looked artificially applied, without the structure characteristic of natural landslides. This meant that someone had deliberately formed the grave. Experts also noticed that there were no personal belongings nearby that would logically have remained in place. No phone, no documents, no sleeping bags, no second backpack. The equipment found looked more like debris that had been brought closer to the surface by the landslide. Forensic experts suggested that heavy material such as gravel, slabs, or concrete fragments could have been deliberately thrown over the bodies. Some of the bones had small indentations that corresponded to gravel particles. However, no traces were found that would indicate a specific method of death. The condition of the bones did not allow for a final conclusion. It was also noted that the quarry was an ideal place to hide something unwanted. Access was limited, and after the work was stopped, no one guarded the territory. According to a former employee of the company who was interviewed shortly after the discovery, in 2008, some of the equipment from the higher ground was removed and transported to another state, leaving only inoperable structures in place. That is, anyone could have driven up here at night without being noticed. After the official confirmation of the identity of the victims, the Gilpin Sheriff's Department updated the classification of the case. The disappearance of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman was no longer classified as a cold case. Now it was a case of a violent death that occurred in a remote quarry, hidden from prying eyes for many years. And while experts continued to study every grain of earth raised from the grave, investigators for the first time thought that someone not only knew about this hidden place, but also left the coordinates where they were eventually found 6 years later. There were more questions about how and why than answers. After the official identification of the victims, the case of Roman Lindsay and Leanna Kaufman ceased to be a cold case and was reclassified as a double murder. The Gilpin County Sheriff's Department made this decision immediately as soon as the results of the forensic examination came back. The report form had a short but telling entry on it. Signs of violent death were found. It is recommended to immediately resume active investigative actions. Detective Megan Gross returned to the case. In 2010, she was a young officer working as part of a search team and remembered well the days when Roman and Leanna were being searched for along the Eagleview Trail. Now, 6 years later, she was leading the investigation as an experienced detective in the Major Crimes Unit. In her memo, she recalled that reopening the case was inevitable once the coordinates pointed to a grave. Her first step was to remove old boxes from the archive room where the Rangers' protocols, maps, photographs, and reports were stored. The boxes were covered with dust, but everything inside was still in order. The case of the disappearance of 2 experienced hikers in 2010 was considered one of the most confusing at the time, although there were almost no traces to investigate. Megan started with the most recent data, the results of the examinations. Dr. Ellis Gregson, a forensic laboratory technician, conducted an extensive analysis of the bone tissue. A fracture of the occipital bone was found on Roman's skull. The fracture line was straight, with characteristic depressions that indicated a blow from a blunt, heavy object. It was not an injury from a fall or an accidental blow to a rock. Such injuries have a different structure. Gregson explicitly stated in his report, "The blow was delivered from the outside with appreciable force, probably with one hand. Fatal." The condition of Leanna's neck vertebrae was another key to understanding what happened. 2 of her cervical vertebrae had characteristic displacement fractures. According to the anthropologist who conducted the examination, such injuries most often occur as a result of strangulation with a noose or a rigid interception of the neck. There were no marks on the other bones that would indicate a fall from a height or a struggle. These facts together formed the final medical report. Roman was killed by a blow, Leanna was strangled. And then both were buried in an artificial pit on the territory of an abandoned quarry. Gross emphasized in her memos that this method of hiding the bodies was indicative of a person who knew the area well and was confident that the site would remain undisturbed for many years. After receiving the forensic reports, Megan began a detailed review of old materials. She downloaded a map from 2010 on which search teams marked patrol zones. The Granite Visto quarry was marked as unlikely at the time because access to it was closed, and much of the area was considered too far from the potential route of the missing couple. This was one of the reasons why the body was not found earlier. Next, Gross reviewed the evidence from witnesses, volunteers, and rangers. According to a transcript of one of the interviews with Ranger John Perry in the early days of the search, he mentioned seeing old tire tracks in the quarry area. But then, according to him, it was explained by the presence of equipment that was removed after the quarry was mothballed. This fragment now looked different. Special attention was paid to the personal belongings found in the grave. The remains of an orange jacket, a nylon backpack, and fragments of a flashlight were subjected to additional examinations. On the jacket's fabric, they found microparticles of clay that did not match the natural topsoil in the Lost Lake area. Gross notes, the jacket was damaged before it was buried. The experts specified that the torn edges on the fabric were uneven, which could be consistent with a violent pulling or struggle. In parallel with the technical findings, the detective began to restore the circle of people who could have been near the area of the disappearance in 2010. A report was found in the archives of the Forest Service that mentioned several tourists who had complained about an aggressive man in camouflage clothing who claimed that certain areas of the forest belonged to him. At the time, these testimonies were not considered significant due to the lack of evidence. Now it has been prioritized. The timing was also important. Experts from the University of Denver issued a preliminary estimate. The bodies had been in the ground for about 6 years, which coincided with the date of the couple's disappearance. This meant that the murder occurred shortly after Roman and Liana disappeared from the Eagle View Trail. As Megan Gross reviewed the materials, she emphasized the fact that distinguished this case from many others. The bodies were not only hidden, they were hidden in a place where someone knew exactly every yard. The quarry was remote, mothballed, and it was almost impossible to find the graves by accident. At a meeting of the investigation team, the detective emphasized this likely profile. A person familiar with the infrastructure of the quarry, with experience of working at similar sites or living nearby. Together with the forensic evidence, this created a clear picture. They were not just killed, but the killer acted in a thoughtful, methodical manner and was able to hide the crime so that neither the search teams nor the rangers would find it. When the investigators completed the initial phase of checking the evidence, it became clear that the current investigation required a wider range of checks and a return to the smallest details that might have seemed insignificant in 2010. All the materials were put back on the table, and no one believed anymore that Roman and Liana had simply gotten lost or were victims of an accident. They were murdered, and their bodies were hidden where they could be found only under one condition, if someone wanted to. And someone 6 years later clearly showed the way. After the initial analysis of the evidence, Detective Megan Gross returned to a source that had hardly been considered seriously 6 years earlier: the testimonies of tourists collected in the days following the disappearance of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman. In 2010, most of these records seemed to be accidental or secondary. But now that the fact of the murder and the method of hiding the bodies have been established, everything that once seemed trivial could turn out to be a clue. In an archival box dated late May 2010, Gross found several interview protocols taken on the day the disappearance was reported. One of them belonged to a middle-aged tourist named Richard Morris. He claimed that he met an unfriendly man in dirty camouflage on the Eagle View Trail who told him to stay off the land. Morris described him as a man in his 50s or 60s with a thick gray beard and a look that he said conveyed nothing but anger. In 2010, investigators decided that he was just a weirdo or a hunter who did not like strangers. Another record showed that a group of young female hikers from Denver that same week heard threats from a man who suddenly came onto the trail and claimed they had scared his dogs. His description was almost identical: camouflage, gray hair, and an emaciated face. The hikers noted that he was aggressive, but did not approach them. The third testimony came from a cyclist, Jason North, who was riding along an old service road near the start of the same trail. He described a similar-looking man standing between the trees watching him, like he was sizing him up. At the time, North didn't attach much importance to these details because there were plenty of such hermits in the Colorado woods. Megan Gross put all these reports side by side and saw the obvious. 6 years ago, investigators had at least 3 independent descriptions of the same person. But then, due to a lack of evidence and a logical link to the disappearance, it was not considered a line of inquiry. Now the situation has changed. After comparing the descriptions, Gross instructed Officer Miller to review the Rangers' service reports for the previous 2 years, 2009 and 2010. A few hours later, he returned with a document that did not appear in the original file. It was an inspection report on a local hermit named Eric Walsh. The report was short. Hunter's complaint verified. Walsh was behaving aggressively, making threats. A verbal warning was given. Quote, 3. Insufficient inspection. Get back to it. Quote, 4. While on patrol, I saw Walsh near the old quarry road. He was standing near his trailer. He reported that he did not see anything suspicious. Quote, 5. 2 impudent city workers are wandering around my place. They do not realize that this is not a park and not their land. Quote, 6. They set up camp in my tract. They think there is no one here. They think that the forest belongs to everyone. It has never been like that. Quote, 7. Forced to leave. They don't listen. They do not see the boundaries, do not hear the warnings. After that, there were several illegible lines that the experts could only partially reproduce. But the most disturbing were the words on a separate page. They did not understand. We had to take action. The old mine knows many secrets. The earth will wash away sins. In her memo, Megan Gross noted that the style and content of the diary clearly indicate a pathological type of thinking. Walsh viewed wilderness areas as his own and felt real hostility toward anyone who came near. In May of 2010, he spoke of his tract, although the land had never belonged to him. His phrase, "They don't respect my land," was repeated in various variations on several pages. Psychological experts, having reviewed the diary, concluded that Walsh had signs of paranoid thinking with a fixation on territoriality. He perceived the appearance of outsiders as a threat, not only physically, but also personally, one that violated the imaginary system of order he had created. There was no direct mention of Roman and Liana's names or descriptions in the diary, but the coincidence of dates, locations, and wording was so obvious that the investigative team had no doubt that the entries were about the couple. Gross's note in the materials: the reference to the tract coincides with the Eagleview Trail area. The time period is late May. Behavior: aggressive, territorially obsessed. The motive is clear. The contents of the diary helped us understand another important aspect. The phrase, "the old mine knows many secrets," actually refers to the territory of the quarry. Walsh not only knew about it, he used this territory as part of his own imaginary system of protection. The documents of the Granite Visto Construction Company confirmed that it was he who supervised the old technical areas in 2008. That is, he was one of the few people who knew every pit, every entrance, every closed tunnel. The diary entries formed an eerily logical sequence: the appearance of 2 young men in his territory, conflict, escalation, measures, and the final phrase about the earth washing away sins. In her final notes for the internal meeting, Megan Gross noted, "The motive is clear. It is a pathological sense of ownership of the forest, a belief that outsiders are encroaching on the territory he considers his own. His aggression is systemic, not accidental. His behavior suggests the possibility of deliberate actions and attempts to hide them." This was the first full understanding that 6 years ago, 2 completely different realities collided in the forest. The reality of tourists who were simply walking the route, and the reality of a man for whom every yard of land was a boundary that he did not forgive. Eric Walsh's arrest took place in the afternoon, when the sun was already sinking toward the horizon, and the shadows of the pine trees were lying in thick stripes on the ground near his trailer. According to the arrest team's protocol, Walsh did not actively resist. He stood on the doorstep, holding a mug of black, long cold tea, and looked at the officers as if they had appeared not under a warrant, but as the result of some long-awaited, natural process. His hands were trembling, but not from fear. The movement was like an uncontrollable habit. After his arrest, Walsh was taken to the Gilpin County Sheriff's Department. Detective Megan Gross was waiting in the interrogation room. There was a white table, 2 chairs, a voice recorder, and a camera that was running continuously. The protocol required starting with basic questions, and for the first few minutes, Walsh remained silent, answering only with short, "I didn't see it. I don't know. I wasn't there." He insisted that he had nothing to do with the victims and rejected any accusations. Gross let him speak. Then she opened a thin folder and pulled out several sheets, photocopies of pages from his diary. She unfolded them in front of him without saying anything else. On the first page were words that he could not deny. 2 city workers violated the boundaries. My tract, forced to leave. The change in Walsh's behavior was not abrupt, but noticeable. He raised his head, looked at the page for a long time, then looked away. His shoulders dropped slightly. From the officer watching through the glass, it looked as if Walsh suddenly recognized that he had nothing to hide. When he spoke, his voice sounded even, almost calm, not like a man repenting, but like someone laying out a sequence of technical actions. His words were later transcribed, preserving the style of fragmentary but precise explanations. According to the version he himself gave, on the day that Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman were on his territory, he was going to check the traps set between the pines. He saw their camp, small, neatly laid out, with a lighted fire. In his words, they were behaving too freely. He repeated this phrase several times. Then, according to Walsh, the conflict arose quickly. He approached the camp and told them to leave. His initial explanations always ended there. It was only after Gross's clarifying questions that he added that Roman got between him and the girl and started arguing. The report states, the subject reports that he was carrying a metal tool that he used to work in the woods. Experts assumed that it was a tire iron, which corresponded to the force of the blow that caused the fracture of Roman's occipital bone. Walsh said he hit him once. When asked why, he replied, because he was poking around. The tone, according to Gross, contained neither anger nor pity, just a dry description of the action. As for Liana, Walsh remained silent for a long time. Then he said, she ran away. According to his testimony, he caught up with her between the trees and stopped her. The transcript reads, the subject showed a gesture imitating a grip on the neck. A forensic examination revealed fractures of the cervical vertebrae, a gesture that matched the nature of the injuries. After that, Walsh said, I realized I had to go through with it. He could not explain what exactly he meant, but his story went on to show that he acted with absolute confidence in the correctness of his actions. He took the matching items, covered the fire, and dragged the bodies further into the forest. And then, the key moment, he started talking about the quarry. According to him, he knew this area better than anyone. It was there that he decided to hide what he called the consequences. He transported the bodies along parts of the road, using an abandoned technical road that had long been overgrown with weeds. He didn't specify how he transported them, but investigators indicated in their notes that Walsh did have an old cart that they found under an awning near the trailer. His phrase was preserved in the report, "The earth takes everything if you put it right." This was consistent with the diary entries. Walsh admitted that he buried them deeply, in a sinkhole between rocks, and poured a layer of clay and small gravel on top. He believed that no one would ever find the place. It was especially important that Walsh did not try to explain or justify his actions. All his words sounded as if he was talking about some technical task performed according to an internal algorithm. The department's psychologist, having read the transcript, made a note. The subject has a distorted perception of territorial property. The imaginary boundary was perceived as absolute. Detective Gross made a separate note. He doesn't talk about people, only trespassers. The motivation is totally territorial. After many hours of interrogation, Walsh agreed to sign a protocol in which he admitted to the conflict, hitting Roman, strangling Liana, and hiding the bodies in the quarry. He did not call it a crime. He called it necessary. It was this moment, according to the officers, that finally proved that for Walsh, the forest was a world where he determined the boundaries, rules, and punishments. And in that world, the appearance of two ordinary tourists was an event that he regarded as an invasion. His confession confirmed what investigators already knew from the forensic evidence and the logic of the events. The trial of Eric Walsh began in early 2017 in the Gilpin County District Court. The trial lasted several weeks, but its meaning was clear on the first day. The prosecution had such a complete set of evidence that there was virtually no chance of a sentence other than life imprisonment. The judges read out the forensic evidence, interrogation reports, and transcripts of Walsh's confession. There was a tense silence in the courtroom, which was not broken even by the defendant's lawyers. They could dispute the details, but not the essence. According to journalists who attended the hearing, Eric Walsh sat with his back straight the entire time, showing no emotion. He listened to the prosecution in the same way he had previously described his actions during interrogation, calmly, without internal struggle. He answered the judge's questions briefly, did not deny the facts, but did not express remorse. There is a characteristic phrase in the report of the forensic psychologist. The subject does not demonstrate awareness of the gravity of the crime. His emotional reaction is absent or minimal, which may indicate alienation and pathological perception of his own actions as justified. The prosecutor's office presented an audio recording of his confession. The room was silent when the phrases "taking action" and "protecting his tract" were heard. For the families of Roman and Liana, these words were the final confirmation of what they had suspected for 6 years. Their children were not killed by accident, nor by a wild animal attack. It was a deliberate act of aggression by a man who, in his own mind, had declared a part of the forest his territory. At the end of the trial, the judge read out the verdict: life imprisonment without parole. Walsh did not react. His face remained stony as the guards led him out of the courtroom. For the families, that moment marked the end of a long, grueling story that began with a simple hike to Lost Lake. In March of that year, the remains of Roman Lindsay and Liana Kaufman were returned to their families and buried in a cemetery in Colorado Springs in adjacent plots framed by young pine trees. According to Liana's mother, there was a light breeze at the funeral, and it was as if the forest itself gave them back at least some of their peace. Many of those present recalled that this was the first place in many years where they felt a sense of closure, albeit painful, but real. Officially, the case was closed. The killer was convicted, the motive was established, and the grave was found. The archives reclassified the case as closed. But one detail remained a spiritual counterpoint that prevented all parties to the investigation from feeling finalized. It is because of this detail that the documents contain the note, "Additional verification is recommended." A stone with coordinates. It never found its explanation. The police checked all possible sources. There were no fingerprints, not a single match to Walsh's handwriting. Experts concluded that the numbers were applied with a stamp or hard tool, not by hand. The duct tape that wrapped the stone did not match any of the tape found in Walsh's trailer. The stone itself was not typical of that area of the forest. Geologists suggested that it had been brought from another part of Colorado. Police found no evidence that Walsh himself had left the coordinates. During the interrogation, he did not admit or deny it. He simply remained silent when asked. The report states, the subject did not answer, looked away, showed no emotion. The remains of the tree in which the stone was found showed that it had been there before the storm, but not for too long. The duct tape was only partially worn away. This meant that someone had placed the stone not 6 years ago, but later, perhaps a year or two before the storm brought down the pine tree. Only one phrase remained in the report, which the investigators formulated without conclusions, but with an obvious reluctance to put an end to it. The person who left the coordinates has not been identified. The motive is unknown. The families of the victims have been trying for years to understand whether it could have been a bystander, or perhaps a person who had stumbled upon something but was afraid to report it directly to the police. One of the volunteers from Trail Care, Colorado, later told reporters, "Someone knew where they were. Someone decided it was time to tell the truth." This version became the most common among investigators, although there was no evidence in its favor. They found no witnesses or people who had seen strangers in the area in previous years. The forest had no traces, and the person who left the stone did not get in touch after Walsh's arrest. A brief remark survives in Gross's official notes. "The forest is silent. It does not reveal secrets for no reason. Someone wanted us to find them. No identification, no name, no logic." The case was formally closed, but the question remained: who put the stone in that hollow, and why? And why at a time when a storm was supposed to break the pine? The Roosevelt National Forest became quiet again, but in its silence there was a sense that the story was only half over.